Welcome, everyone. I'm Abby Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard. And I am filling in today for my colleague, Krishna Lewis, who directs our fellowship program and is unable to host today, but it is my great pleasure and honor to be able to sit in on this particular conversation and to welcome two good friends of the Hutchins Center back today, Kinitra Brooks and Regina Bradley, as they speak on Kinitra's new book, The Roots of Black Southern Religious Traditions. Kinitra is the Audrey and John Leslie Endowed Chair in Literary Studies in the Department of English at Michigan State University. During the 2022-23 academic year, she's here with us at Harvard as the visiting Associate Professor of Women's Studies and African American Religions in the Women's Studies in Religion program at Harvard Divinity School. Dr. Brooks was our Advancing Equity Through Research Fellow here at the Hutchins Center during the 2018 and 19 academic year, which was a wonderful year for our fellowship program. Dr. Brooks specializes, she has earned a lot of fellowships, but I don't know.
Put that on her business card, Dr. Fellowship.
Start over. Dr. Brooks specializes in the study of Black women, genre fiction, and popular culture. She has a weekly column in The Root called The Safe Negro Guide to Lovecraft Country, and she's a frequent commentator on NPR's 1A. She has also co-edited The Lemonade Reader, an interdisciplinary volume that explores the nuances of Beyonce's 2016 audiovisual project, Lemonade. Dr. Brooks is the author of the highly acclaimed Searching for Cigarettes, Black Women's Hauntings of Contemporary Horror, which is a critical treatment of Black women in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And she is also the author of Cigarettes' Daughters, an edited volume of short horror fiction written by Black women. Her current research focuses on portrayals of the conjure woman throughout history and in contemporary popular culture. Dr. Brooks will be joined in discussion today by Dr. Regina N. Bradley. An award-winning writer and researcher of the Black American South, Dr. Bradley is an alumna Nasir Jones Hip Hop Fellow. She was here at the Hutchins Center in 2016, also a very memorable year. She is Associate Professor of English and African Diaspora Studies at Kennesaw State University. Dr. Bradley is the faculty editor of the journal Southern Cultures, as well as co-host of the very popular and critically acclaimed Southern hip hop podcast, Bottom of the Map, with music journalist Christina Lee. A prominent public voice and leading scholar on contemporary Southern Black life and hip hop culture, Dr. Bradley is the author of the groundbreaking book chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip Hop South. She is also the editor of An Outcast Reader. Welcome to you both. We will begin with a presentation by Dr. Brooks, which will be followed by a conversation between Dr. Bradley and Dr. Brooks. At that point, we will ask the audience to comment or ask questions, and we'll have directions in the chat for you. And that's all from me. Would you like to start, Kinitra?
Of course. Thank you, Abby. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'd like to thank everyone for their presence here today. And I would like to really give a deep thanks to the Hutchins Center for continuing to support my work. The Conjure Feminism, this book started at the Hutchins Center. And, Harvard has continued to support me as I move through this. And the Hutchins Center is a place that continues to have my heart. And I'd like to thank Abby. I'd like to thank Krishna Lewis. Like to thank Tom Wolieko, made sure I knew how to say his name properly, as well as Justin Sneed for making the gorgeous flyer. And we'll talk later. But thank you, Dr. Bradley, for your continued support. And she's always here to support me. And I hope she always feels the same way about me. This is a continuation of my previous talk that I gave as a part of my Hutchins lecture, The Conjure Woman's Garden. And I also co-edited a volume on conjure feminism at Hypatia Journal. And this is continuing a continuation of the Conjure Feminism Project. This is a monograph that I am currently working on, and it's tentatively titled Here, Divine Conjurers, Recovering Black Women's Intellectual Histories of Spirit Work. And what I want to do is just lay a little bit out about some of the ideas of the overall text, and do a small deep dive in some areas, but I just want to lay the groundwork for the coming conversation and hopefully your questions and areas that that you yourself may have some insight and be able to, give me recommendations as this is an ongoing project. So, okay. Yeah, okay, got it. So I want to begin with this quote by Michael Gomez, which say, over and over again, the sources repeat the fact that Africans and African Americans were cognizant of the white ways of worship and consciously rejected them. And the central idea to this project is an expansion of the practices Black Southern folks, and particularly Black Southern women's practices of conjure, how their practice of conjure also integrated with their Christian identity and informed a certain politic, right? It had a political bend to it and affected and how they use conjure to create their political ethos, as well as enact certain aspects of that ethos itself. And I want to continue this, I want to have, what I'm most interested in is this multiplicity. And I think that sometimes historically what's happened, folks either do too much in conjure or too much in Christianity. And I really want to push the idea for the multiplicity of these women's identities and where they were and what they were doing. So I noticed, and going with this, I wanted to fill some epistemic gaps of what I was seeing. So I wanted to make sure this was a Black feminist project, but also recognizing and pushing back against the secularity of Black feminism. And I'll talk later about the importance of faith in Black women's lives, and particularly those of Southern Black women, their lives, and the necessity of having to have conversations about faith, conversations about God, conversations about ancestors when speaking of, and anything and any sort of politic or ethic centering on Black women and their experiences. I also wanted to make sure that it was Southern. I want to, and this conversation here is speaking to what we sometimes feel is an absence of a recognition of the intellectualism and the intellectual histories of Black Southernness, and to really have a conversation about that these women were theorists, these women were philosophers, these women were botanists, and that they were having very, very complex conversations amongst themselves and being made up themselves of very complex ideas. I wanted to focus on healing. I've spoken about Black Christianity, as well as acknowledging the power of the traditional African religious practices, and not always a specific religion, but the practices of conjure and hoodoo. Let me go in here. So going into this with the words of Christy Dotson, who's a Black feminist philosopher, and she's doing really good work on these ideas of white supremacy as bad magic, right? And there are other folks who are working on this. There's Racecraft, the book Racecraft, that talks about white supremacy as a magic spell that has us all beholden. So, she's talking about, Dotson is talking about, says epistemologies are reservoirs of myth, mysticism, and ritual that perform their own forms of magic they conjure. And this is where this expansion of conjure, the practice of conjure, into this concept and this idea that I'm working on, conjure feminism, really comes to fore, right? Of saying that it wasn't just about the practice, but about the ethics surrounding the practice and the sense of self and knowledge that backed it up. So I am being clear that I am not redefining conjure. I think conjure has been very well defined. I am specifically working off of Katrina Hazard-Donald's working on conjure and hoodoo. And in fact, her 8 elements of the hoodoo religion influence my 8 elements of conjure feminism. Also, Yvonne Chevreau has continued to do good work here. So the idea of conjure is already established. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to worry those boundaries in any way. What I do want to do is push it further and seeing how conjure and actually manifested in the lives of Southern Black women, and came to do so. I also spoke about Black feminism's secularity, and I'm piggybacking and being inspired by Tamora Lomax's work of creating a Black feminist theology, particularly in response and in conversation with womanist theologies. But I also push back against Lomax's use of Black feminist theology, again, as focusing so much on the Black Protestant tradition, and saying that we needed a way to talk about Black women's ways of worship, Black women's ways of belief that doesn't only focus on Black Protestant traditions. We have Black Catholics, we have folks who practice Islam, and we have folks who practice traditional African religions and are heavily influenced by traditional African practices themselves. And again, continuing with this and dealing with this reality that 86% of Black women believe in God with absolute certainty. So we cannot have a way of speaking about Black women and their ways of knowing and their sense of self that does not include and center on their relationship with God or the ancestors or their belief systems and however they manifest. So I wanted to focus on, with conjure feminism, creating a Southern Black feminist magic-centered politic. And in doing this, when I first gave this talk, I had these 4 elements here, and I've since expanded it. And these first 4 elements I came up with working with Drs. Camilla Martin and Dr. Lakeisha, Dr. Lakeisha Simmons. And, but the last 4, I've since expanded as I've continued to do work in it, but I did want to go over it because I think it'll inform the conversation that Dr. Bradley and I will have. The first being, there are consequences for your action. Death is not an ending, it's only a transition. That one is beholden to the past as well as the future. So one must think about the ancestors while also continuing to plan for future generations. So the present is always, is never existing alone. And also that spirit work is necessary for the general health. That's both your physical, your psychological, and your spiritual health as a person. The last 4 are our secrets save our lives and our ways of knowing. Things that I'm running into as I go into this project are that a lot of these were secret practices, and how do I begin to access them, particularly as someone coming sometimes 50 years later, sometimes 100 years later, as I research and search for these women in the archives, but also in conversations with their descendants. We must fully embrace conjure's double-pronged nature. That is, that conjure is a system of both healing as well as harm. And think about the sometimes uncomfortable nature of Black folks potentially harming one another as well as harming others through conjure practices, through root work, through spirit work, through these things, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit, particularly in regards to my 3rd chapter. Next is that spirit possession is a valid knowledge source, and that knowledge can be passed down through prophecy given when there is a co-presence, as Alicia Bello de Jesus talks about. When someone is actively being possessed, that is a way to pass down knowledge that isn't always respected by outsiders, but is definitely heavily influenced in the practice of conjure. And finally, a politic of refusal towards white supremacies and Black patriarchies, and really going into looking at indigenous philosophies and starting to look at what a politics of refusal looks like, and then adapting it and negotiating it within a Black feminist dynamic. So I have 4 guiding questions for the project as a whole. First, beginning, what does a Black feminist theology that centers spirit work look like? And again, this is moving outside of, well, not moving outside of, because again, I want that multiplicity, but also expanding and having room for, right? Having room for traditional African religious practices along with as it coexisted, because we must remember that folks didn't always say, like, I define myself this way. You know, in my previous talks and in my previous writings, I've talked about my great-grandmother and her influence and her work as a conjure woman, and she never referred to herself as a conjure woman. She always insisted that she was a child of God, right? And we also have to, what I also want to do is have respect for how these women define themselves. My next question is, how are Southern Black women inspired to liberation, not only through Jesus, but also through spirit work? And I'm using spirit work to talk about conjure and many of its practices, as Camilla Martin talks about them in her work. You know, I'm really interested in, and I always talk about this, I'm interested in Black women who kill, Black women who poison, Black women who do some of the dirty and the wet work, and how that it can often be just as revolutionary in a different way as taking up arms, right? For women that would slowly poison the families of their enslavers, for women that would kill children, for women that would have these small ways of pushing back that added up in many ways to something greater. So, but also in terms of like the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, we know there was a return to many of traditional African religions and practices, but also what else were Black women doing when they were praying through the civil rights movement? What conjure practices were taking place? I'm working on, there's a short story by N.K. Jemisin called Red Dirt Witch that talks about a Southern Black conjure woman that would sprinkle, spells into the food before they sent folks out to go march. That talked about a Black woman who would braid her daughter's hair with donkey tail, right? So that she would have the stubbornness to refuse to get up, to refuse to move from the counter. I'm interested in those sorts of stories. And third, how does conjure feminism recover or sustain lost systems of knowledge as crucial political work? And I think that's continuing that idea, as well as what is conjure feminism's contemporary manifestation. In looking at, there are folks that I follow on Twitter, on Instagram, as folks go back to, particularly younger folks are going back to these traditions and recovering them. How is that informing their own political sense, their own sense of push for movement and push for change? How does that intertwine with the spirit work that they are doing? So this is basically how I'm organizing the book. The first is on the Congo, and I'm recovering Donna Kimpa Vita, and I've done some research last semester. I went to the archives, I went to the Propaganda Fide, and looking at this woman from the early 18th century Catholic Congo's kingdom, who was a priestess in the indigenous religion. She's what's called a Ganga Marinda. And but she, as well as being a faithful Catholic, and she was possessed by the spirit of Saint Anthony and pretty much went to war with the Congolese monarchy and the Catholic Church at the same time. She eventually underwent the Inquisition and was burned at the stake in 1706. And I am looking at her as a primogenitor, as a mother of conjure feminism, particularly in her mixture of Christianity as well as traditional African religious practice, as well as her politic of refusal. Right. And so then what happened was, once she was killed, many of her followers were enslaved and sent to the Americas. And folks are starting to, I'm doing the work of looking at what's called the Antonian diaspora and her followers who were sent to the Americas and then would cause insurrections there. My second chapter is working on those followers, the work they were doing in the Caribbean. And the third chapter, I move it to New Orleans as we look at, New Orleans is often called the northernmost city of the Caribbean, and that interaction between Southern Louisiana and the Caribbean, and particularly its relations with Haiti and Cuba, and those folks that went to New Orleans in the early 19th century. And I've spoken about the last part of the U.S. South, looking at those contemporary manifestations, looking at it in the social media, looking at it in the literature, and looking at it in the film, in the work of folks such as Bree Newsom's Her Wake, which is a short 20-minute short film that you should definitely look at. And that's going to lead me into conversation with Dr. Bradley. Okay, stop sharing.
Y'all can see me okay? It is storming here in good old Atlanta, so the sun is coming in and out. So I'm not trying to be all mysterious or anything like that. If it looks like I'm coming in, the light seems darker or shadowy. No shadow work going on over here, Dr. Brooks, not today. But yeah, first of all, this is amazing. I just want to make sure I put that out there. I really think that this book is going to change the game for so many different fields. And just conversations, just everyday conversations. I feel like one of the important things about your work is that it's able to exist inside the academy as well as outside of the academy. Which is where I kind of want to start this conversation, right? Like, as folks who study things that aren't necessarily supposed to be in the academy, right? Whether it's, spiritual belief or for me, hip hop, right? I think I always find it fascinating to kind of think about, what do you feel is the significance of studying this in this particular way, in this particular area, right? Like, one of the things you talked about was this idea of reclamation. So how is, what precautions are you putting in place to study something as sensitive and as dynamic as spirituality, to make sure that, you don't necessarily lose sight of the reason that it exists in the first place? Because as academics, we really can suck the life out of anything. What are we studying, right? I wanted to start there.
I agree. I think a couple of things. I think that is why I moved more into a political idea of what were its political effects, because I started to get not nervous, but very aware of the lines that I wouldn't cross. Mm. And so in me putting that sort of ethic in place for my own personal for my own personal practice, I recognized that there were ways that I could talk about this and its effects in ways that didn't cross the line, the lines that were there for reasons, and respecting the traditions of the women in my family, but also, ancestors as a whole, of what should and what should not be talked about when company is around. And so I think that moving more into how it informed a politic allows me to have a lot more maneuverability and the ability to speak more openly, as well as I think that it allows folks that I plan to interview to speak more openly about it, because you can talk about someone's social justice work. You can say your grandmother did this and your grandmother did this, which also can lead into the conversation about conjure and spirit work. But by it not focusing on that, I think that can sometimes get folks' hackles up as well.
Yeah, because that was going to be the next part of my question, right? Is and I'm thinking about this from as Southern Black women's plural. Right? The bullet point you made about, or the pillar you had about, our secrets save our lives and ways of knowing. So the first thing I automatically thought about is nobody keeps a secret like an elder Black Southern Black woman. Like it is. It's never necessarily like, this is me preserving knowledge. It's more so you trying to get in grown folks' business. So like, I'm thinking, like multiple things are going on in my head about this. Like I'm buzzing, right, with excitement. But I'm like, a couple of things I thought about was, how do we reclaim those things after these women are gone? So like, personally, something that I'm going through right now is trying to write about my grandmother. And my grandmother was 96, right? And she only talked about, things that were appropriate outside the house and inside the house, right? Like, I know that she had these, like she raised us see me, right? Which also steps away from that understanding that everybody in the Black South is Baptist, more specifically rural Baptist. I'm like, nope, I am CME. I am Christian Methodist Episcopal. Going to Baptist church with my friends made me nervous. Howsoever, how do we get at that knowledge that oftentimes these elders don't think it's knowledge to share to begin with, right? Like they give like these generalized strokes. Like I didn't even necessarily think about the idea of there being a Southern Black indigenous spirituality. The only thing that I was taught was that it was called roots. And that was like the umbrella term for everything. No, be careful with where you put your hair. Make sure that, your sanitary products, like don't just leave them out because somebody can tie it, get it to a tree and you can go crazy. Like these are forms of knowledge, but it's kind of like, are they something that you just kind of put out there? Like, do you talk to your friends about this? So, can you speak a little bit about how that in itself is an act of politicization, how that in itself is an act of humanizing, folks who weren't supposed to be believed to be humane in the first place, right? Like, how do we, I said a lot, but I mean,
a couple of things. I want to say, first of all, there is no set time of when you actually become grown folk.
True folk.
Because I feel like I'm 40 plus years old, I got a mortgage, all these
Don't
things.
matter.
But in many aspects, I'm still in certain circles, I'm still not grown enough to have these conversations. But I remember the author Nalo Hopkinson was having a conversation. She talks about this in Brown Girl in the Ring, and she says, our secrets used to save our lives, but now they're killing us. Right? And so she was, of course, talking about things such as like sexual assault, and all of these things in Black families and those sorts of things. But it always affected me some of our secrets are continuing to save our lives.
Right.
And what are those secrets? And how are they affecting how we move throughout the world, right? Because some of these secrets are still necessary. And so I'm really And I think that's why, again, I made that turn into politics and whatever, because it's more helpful to talk about that. But also, I think that it's hard to get at these secrets as I move back into folks like, Kimpa Vita, as I move back into some of these Black women in New Orleans, I'm looking at in the 19th century, right? How do you access those conversations? But then that's also where I'm getting into like possession as a valid source of knowledge, right? So then when you start to do actual ancestral and spirit work, can you tap into some of these conversations from the other side, right? And so then you get this, what counts as academic, and what counts as, do dreams and dream interpretations, can those count as, academic and supported, and can that be peer reviewed, right? I think there's also a reason why this is like my second project. This is a reason why this is my tenured project, because I really want to push the boundaries of what counts as evidence as to what counts as worthy of peer review. And also that is why this book has an academic aspect to it, but it also has a real world aspect, because I have continued that vow of I'm not going to read something, I'm no longer going to write things that my parents can't understand. I don't have to follow those rules anymore. I've proved that I can do that, but I don't want to do it anymore. And so I want to really change with how I'm writing in this, to have a conversational tone to it, where it is reachable to folks if they want to read it. They don't have to be disciplinarians.
Love it. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. I know y'all are here, so
they might be. Don't let her ask. Don't call on Wanda Brooks to answer a question.
No. I'm just. I mean, once you find out a way to peer review the ancestors, give me a holler, because
I know. I love you, Mama.
That'll help me out a lot, right? I can't help but think about, one of your questions that you're asking in this book was, what is contra feminism's contemporary manifestation, right? And as Southerners, we never necessarily get to. Hey, Dad.
My dad is here.
We never necessarily get to engage the question of contemporary, because so many folks are so comfortable, even complicit with the idea that the South's idea of modernity stops at the civil rights movement. It sounds very familiar for folks who read my book, right? But for those of us who became thoughts after the 60s, the 70s, you know what I mean, who grew up with, not necessarily a nuanced understanding of spiritual work, but more so like this is roots, and roots will get you in trouble, and you know what I mean? And then you also have like this explosion of root work, and hoodoo in particular, that is making its rounds in popular culture. I couldn't help but think about hip hop, right? Like I'm like, okay, I can see how Kinitra's in conversation with, Zora Neale Hurston and Alice Walker. I'm like, there have been, Gloria Naylor with Mama Day, right? Like most folks, when they start with root work, they go to Mama Day. But I'm thinking even more so like, what does that look like? Because if the South, particularly Southern Blackness, is not monolithic, then that spirit work is not monolithic. No, it is not. The way that them roots are taking shape in rural Southwest Georgia, where your girl is from, is different than what you were, what you were experiencing in New Orleans, right? So I'm wondering if complicating the idea of Southernness influences how you're thinking about this idea of contemporary conjure feminism.
It very much does. I've had to become a lot more specific in my language and in my focus. And particularly as I am working on the third chapter, it was going to be the US South. But now I'm not even doing all of Louisiana. like Southern Louisiana. I've had, because, and even in looking at some of the literature, some of it takes place in Alabama. Mama Day takes place in the Gullah Islands and South Carolina, Georgia area.
Yep.
So I think, and this is continuing to be influenced by your work of the idea of the multiple Souths, right? And also the idea of I was raised and still am Southern Baptist. I was raised missionary Baptist, and I thought everybody was missionary Baptist until encountering my friends being from New Orleans, who being Catholic. My best friend when I was growing up was AME, you're CME. So learning all of these different ways of being a Black person of faith. And this was even before going into Islam, going into ATRs and those sorts of things. So I also have to be very much aware of how folks define themselves, how they practice, and what parts of the South they come from, and the different influences, because we have to remember that folks had to deal with different flora and fauna as they landed. So different recipes calls for different types of things, right? Things that Zora Neale Hurston is talking about in Florida are different than the conversation she had when she was undergoing initiation in New Orleans, and different sorts of practices were used, but that's because there were different things available that were used. Also, there were different indigenous populations of natives that they were having different conversations with. So there are all these influences, as well as the different populations of white folks that were there, and having the European influences onto conjure and root work as well. Okay.
So I know that people have questions and want to get at your brilliance, but I have this one last thing I want to say. I have a last question. So my other question is, I just thought about this as we were talking. How does conjure make the dirty South dirty? Because it's just, that is the question that is continuously swirling in my head, right? And I think the reason that is, especially, because I'm thinking about articulations of Black womanhood in the hip hop South. That's what I'm playing around with right now. And we talk about it like we almost point sticks at it. We almost point a direction, right? But I'm hoping that your work and a lot of the other work around conjure feminism that's being done will answer this question. What makes, that people think about the dirty South and think about hip hop in particular, right? They think about illegibility, they think about illegal economies. And I feel like conjure could be part of that conversation. And I'm also, but this is what I wanted to ask is even if conjure makes certain things legible or illegible, as a Southern Black woman studying this, where does sexuality fall into this? Or, you know what I mean? Or where does this idea of sex, right? Because I was taught that sex was probably as magical and as devastating in a devastating way. It wasn't necessarily a pleasurable thing. Sex was labor. It was an effort to keep the race going. It wasn't necessarily something that was you can sit down and enjoy it. And I'm thinking about not, and I saw Dr. Halliday put into the chat, I was laughing. It was when thoughts become thoughts. I'm when does hypersexuality, if we read that through this conjure feminism lens that you and Camila and Lakeisha are presenting, how does that change the game? It has to, because it feels like it has to, renegotiate what the negative connotations of, sexuality in Southern Black women being as conservative as we are and how conservative we are raised to be. It is an escape point. It's an intervention in ways that we might not have access to otherwise. So any thoughts on that?
I think a couple of things. One, I think, the conjure makes dirty South dirty, not just because of roots and being in the actual dirt, but also the griminess of conjure of, you take people out. You can take people out and people are ruthless. And I like to push back against this idea that, Southern folks are malleable and friendly and all these.
You just got home training. Why don't
there is I know a home training again surrounding the ruthlessness. Right. but I also think in terms of the idea, home training is spirit work. Thank you.
Yes,
Dr.
yes, it
Gallagher.
is.
Yes, it is.
Come on,
Right.
yeah.
It's very much speaking around and about. But in terms of sexuality, we have to remember, I think, and Angela Davis talks about this in her blues work, her work on blues women, where conjure and stuff like that would have room for sexuality, for queerness. But also remember, with conjure and spirit work, this work was very bodily focused and visceral. You use your spit. You use your menstrual blood. You have to go in deep to get these spells and to get these roots working, right? So these things don't work without your hair. They don't work without actual physical parts of your body and your body's fluids being a part of it. So you must have some sort of a comfortable nature with your body, because you have to access your body to reach its ashe, to reach its power, in order to enliven the root or the spell or the fix that you are doing. It's enlivened by your ashe.
I like that. Awesome. Okay, that was my last question. I'm ready, Abby. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
Here I am. No, I could listen to both of you for a much longer. Thank you so much for that conversation. But I know we can see the chat is very active. So I suspect there are some questions from the audience. But before we move to questions, I just want to welcome, we have a group here, a few people, I think, from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation in Maryland, who reached out to me about this talk because they wanted to bring a group of people for their annual Black celebration or Black History Month celebration. So welcome to you all. And you couldn't have chosen a better, I think I told you that the organizer that he could not have chosen a better moment for that. So anyway, but let me turn it over to people for questions, and just raise your hand in the reactions button and I will. Okay, Mariah Weber, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi, Dr. Brooks and Dr. Bradley. My name is Mariah Weber. I am a PhD candidate at UC Santa Barbara, and I'm looking at the connections between hoodoo culture and strip club cultures. I was also raised Southern Washington Missionary Baptist Church, and had a very clear distinction between the secular and the sacred. And so in the initial comments on your talk, you talked a little bit about moving away from secular, or trying to push back against secularity within conversations of the Black South. So I'm just curious about, and your conversation that y'all were just talking about, using bodily fluids and having to put your ashe in a working in order to get it going. So I'm just wondering how you are thinking about the body and sexuality in your work. This is something I'm really trying to articulate, because I was looking at your interventions, and you make interventions in a lot of areas, Southern studies, sexuality studies, Black feminist studies, religious studies. And I feel like this is a very huge project for me. And so I'm just curious to know how you've been navigating that during this time and during your writing process.
God's honest truth, it's been kicking my butt. Because I want to have, and I do think that one helpful thing is, I know this isn't the be all and end all, and there are many people having this conversation. So I had to definitely work out where I'm going to fit in and what I am most interested in finding out. I did want to say that I'm pushing back against the secularity of Black feminist theory, in particular. And Tamora Lomax talks about that in her Jezebel Unhinged. And that you just need to have a way to talk about faith if you're going to talk about Black women at all. I know you got the P-Valley stuff going on with the Conjure, and in I'm starting the second season. I haven't quite got on the second season because my sister has the Stars She got the STARS app, and I have to get the code word from her. But I think there's a lot of room there. Your work sounds really exciting, but I also think you have to be, I would suggest you be very focused on what it is that you have to say. And I'm focusing it very much on my lived experience and the lived experience of the people around me. That's why it got smaller into Southeastern Louisiana, because I am very much interested in the journey of my maternal ancestors and how some of the manifestation of the beliefs that they have and the actions that they have done, and how I'm interested in, I was talking to my mom one time when my thing clicked, because she thought I was telling family secrets, and I'm like, it's not about that. It's that I see her and the women of my family as philosophers, as they're doing really, really complex, interesting weaving going on, but it's not always realized as such. And going back into that sort of illegibility of Black Southern folks, and particularly Black Southern women that Dr. Bradley was speaking about. I hope that answered your question.
I'm ready to read though. I need all of the strip clubs and I need it.
I know, right?
I need it.
You don't want to live in Atlanta.
I mean, that means
I have to come down.
I need it.
Okay, I'm coming down.
Sorry.
Don't say nothing.
Dance like a stripper. Sorry. Former life.
Gregory Brooks has raised their hand. Please don't call. Why you come? Please don't. Why she gonna raise her hand every time? Abby, that is my mother. She can ask me at home.
I unmuted myself. I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter. I do want to say, for the longest, I did not understand. I was very reluctant to give her information because my grandmother was so secretive about what she did. She did not explain things to me. I would pick up things from what I saw or heard quietly, because you couldn't listen to grown folk conversation back then. And so when my daughter asked me questions, I was very combative at first, because I felt like I was betraying my grandmother and those things that I did know and did witness. Now I spend my time trying to remember some of those things, because I just thought I was holding a secret that needed to be kept. And I realized it does not need to be kept now. But that's not Gregory Brooks, it's Wanda. Thank you.
Love you, Miss Wanda.
I love you.
Hey, girl. I'm coming down
Love
that
you.
I'm coming soon.
All right. That's my boo. That's my boo, Miss Wanda.
Now y'all see why I find my family so interesting. This is us in public.
Yeah. So I've been adopted. I've been adopted to the family.
Well, when she cooks for you, you're a part of the family.
Hey, and she did. It was fire too. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm so glad we all had that moment together too. Aria Halliday, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hey, Dr. Holiday.
Hey y'all. I'm so excited. When I saw this was happening, I was just like, there's literally nothing else I could possibly be doing at this moment. I don't care. Because I mean, y'all know I'm super fan. I'm a super fan of both of you. So I'm just excited.
Super fans back.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. But of course, my mama does the same thing. She always is like asking a question at any of my presentations. And so it made me think about what your mother offered and what you both offered about kind of like secrets and fidelity to your family, fidelity to your culture, fidelity to your family. And I was thinking about kind of this conversation about archive, right? And like, how do we learn about, grow, expand upon, discover the archive if the information is supposed to be only learned via I don't know, conversations or beliefs, or picking it up from your grandmother's doing something on the side, or, you're in an area, for me, it was, I'm in an area of trouble. I'm struggling with something. And she's like, okay, you need to read this. You need to do this. You need to put this here, and then you'll be set. And it's like, okay, I'm not sure. Like, you want me to do exactly this, and no, you got to add salt here, and you right. And so I'm just interested in maybe talking about kind of one, the academic kind of conversation, but I think kind of social conversations about archive, especially for Black folk, Black women's archives, but also what that means when, you know, the archive doesn't exist until you learn it, until you need it, until you know, fall into it. And what that means for your work, Kinitra, but also what that means around kind of Southern Black women's information and knowledge when you don't even know it until you have to do, like you have to do it, right? And so I'm just interested in about how you write about that, how you think about that, and then what that means in a contemporary moment when some people don't have their grandmothers to go back to or ask a question or learn, and their mothers don't necessarily even know because all they know is what they needed to know in a given moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dr. Holliday. I think a couple of things. One, I think that what informs this, a lot of this, and the conversation is going back to my mom. She told me something very important that I hold close, and she said, not every story is yours to tell. Mm-hmm. And so I have to be very specific and assessing in terms of that. And I also get a lot of visits via dreams where of my maternal ancestors, of if I'm on the right track or not, or if I'm doing too much or not. And again, you get into this idea of, you know, peer review, right? Who says something if your great grandmother comes in your dream and checks you, right? Right? You can't, you know, how again do you, there is no way to measure that. So I think it comes into believing and knowing what is true to you and to yours and to the people you are beholden to. I also use what Zandria Robinson, she talks about, I use it as a methodology of not studying about white folks, right? Of like, some of these things, I can't just be obsessed of what the academy will think about it, or how this will look in my book, or how I will write about this. I'm following the story and where I'm being inspired, and I believe personally, spiritually led to go. And that's all I can do, and I trust the process.
Thank you. Do we have any other, I can't believe there aren't other questions. I think everyone is spinning from this, but we have another minute for, oh, I see a hand. Oh, Murray, hello. Can you unmute yourself, please?
It's just like my family and friends here. Like, I know it's
a couple of questions. So I saw Murray Miller Young's hand first. So, and then we do have a couple of other.
She doesn't know how to unmute.
Oh, can you unmute?
Here, I'm gonna have to make her.
Okay, Tom is solving the problem. Okay, you know what? While we wait for that, why don't we go to?
Okay, I got it.
Got it? Okay, good. Hello.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So nice to be here. I'm supposed to be prepping for my class, but I'd rather be here too. I've been, you know, a fan of your work for ages, and I'm glad that one of my students was here asking a question. And Arya asked the question I wanted to ask about archives. I want to push you more on that because, you know, it is a question to whether or not, because of the institutionalization of archives, that we even want to archive some of this knowledge. Yeah. But it brings the question of how do we pass it on to, you know, it's not something I trust the academy with, you know, or even wonderful Harvard archives. Like, it is something that is probably not meant for those spaces, right? And I'm thinking about that with the Black Erotic Archive too. I have a very torn relationship to the idea of, you know, how and where to institutionalize it, you know. And And the second thing I wanted to say, kind of regarding something that we talked about before, is I'm really conflicted on the question of harm and how conjuring can be used as a weapon towards others. I mean, warranted, it's usually only used in, situations, well, I don't know usually, but it seems like it's a good defense mechanism to like get back at people who are messing with you. But I guess, we hear about karma, which is the Eastern religion. It's not out of the same tradition. But I wondered if you could talk about that, the kind of ideas or sense of morality behind that double-edged sword, the kind of fact that it can be used as a weapon against your enemies. And I always feel really conflicted about that as someone who's kind of delving in these areas too. I feel like the energy and the magic you put out needs to be pure and needs to be, out of love. And I never use my skills to like hurt other people, though I think angry thoughts, but I try not to, but because I've seen it be really powerful. And then my mother-in-law went splat right in front of my house. The car took off the brake and she was all bloodied. And I said, uh-oh, I better not put those bad wishes out into people are gonna get hurt. So that's the question I have for you. What about that harm issue? And is that something that is seen out of an African tradition?
I would say a couple of things. One, some Kimpa Vita's indigenous religion eventually comes over here and then partially becomes Palo Mayombe, which is the scary part of African religions that people talk about. But that's also because it doesn't have like the sense of, I guess, the false sense of morality that other do. There's no karma. Good and bad are also kind of like, because you're talking about putting out harmful and getting people who are harm you, and you want to put out love, but love for who, right? If you feel as if, using your example, your mother-in-law is actively harming you and your children, in your love for your children, you will defend, right? So, these are the things, right? In the love for your people, in the love for your family, in the love for these things, you will do whatever is necessary to protect those things, right? And we also have to talk about this, going back to Dotson, going back to racecraft. White supremacy uses magic and myth-making in order to defend and protect itself. Are we going to get squeamish when it's time to go to war with it? Right? Are we going to get squeamish when it's time to go to war with patriarchy? Wait, why are we being squeamish here, right? We are literally fighting for our lives. So why are we suddenly developing or feeding into a sense of morality that has nothing to do with justice?
Thank you. Kinitra and Regina, can you stick around for about 5 more minutes for one more question?
Sure.
Okay, good. Dr. Sonia Lanehart, I see your hand up. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. Good morning, it's still morning here. I don't know. I guess it's afternoon there. Thank you so much for this. I was telling Joycelyn that I'm sad that I couldn't be there, that there's not the in-person event like there was for your 2019 one. That was lovely. And I can see sort of the connections in some ways for this. And listening to your talk and why you were saying that you were doing some of this, and even thinking about your mom's comment about loosening up, her skepticism around this, but then loosening up, it reminded me of something that I've just been in a space of for recently, which was Toni Morrison's comment that racism is a distraction. And I love that you said that who you're writing for and why you can do that now. And part of this reminds me of something that my mom would always tell me when I was growing up, and something that I've experienced too. And I think happens for a lot of people of color, and certainly for Black women in the academy, of what you can and can't say and what you're supposed to do. Like, I recently did a podcast interview where we're talking about curiosity. And my mom essentially trained in me that Black people didn't get to be curious, that was something white people got to do. And so in connecting those two things, I think about the work that I do in African American language and realize that I had to spend a period of time losing my ideas around curiosity about my people's language in order to fit into a system that wouldn't really accept the things that I needed to learn and to explore and to say, right? And so I'm seeing this parallel thing with what you're saying, like, who is it that I want to talk to and who is this work for? And how that creates this, this weirdness in this space of academia, right, that we're in. But that was just a comment I wanted to make. The other thing I just, well, it's a comment, it's kind of a question and its connection to your stuff. But I was chatting with Dolan Hubbard, and I think he meant to ask this. He said he did. He meant to ask this to the group, but it just came to me, which was, he said, I remember my mother telling me in the preteen years in North Carolina about many of the Black women in our Baptist church, telling me that many of these Christian sisters would go back to the South Carolina lowlands, in parentheses, Gullah country, and load up. I now imagine that was consistent with their worldview. And we lived near Salisbury, North Carolina, home to Livingston College. And then the second part, I guess, was, he said, yeah, that was a question for the group. How does, and I'm not sure what the word is that's missing, how does what in the Black women's politics, in the Black women's politics of the spiritual questions? So maybe Dolan can clarify that if need be. But I just, yes, wonderful work. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I like to say, in particularly to your comment, like, I owe a debt, right? I owe a debt to the women who in my family who clean white folks' toilets, the debt to the women and the people in my family who scrubbed up, who, I am the daughter and granddaughter of domestic workers. I have to tell their stories, and I have to tell them with love, with gentleness, and with care, and with the respect that they deserve.
Hey, yep.
Yeah. Hi, Dolan.
Hi. Hey, this is a very rich conversation. I can only say that I guess somewhere when I was pursuing my doctorate in Illinois, I really began to sort of unpack this, because I remember my mother would say to these women, these good sisters, Christian sisters, they would go back to the South Carolina lowland, the Geechee country that was said in my community, and load up. But she never really explained to me what load up meant. But I guess it was their way of giving them strength in order to survive. And then what segregated, American South and the lowlands. So yes, we've
and the load up roots, right? You gotta
load up.
restock.
Can you explain what it means? Unpack.
So
it?
you gotta restock your supply, right? Because you've been using it.
Yes.
So you gotta go back to the country.
Yes.
And get your
You can't
roots.
take what everybody gives you either, though. You got to go to your particular people.
Yeah, you gotta go to your particular
Tried and
place.
true.
The people
Right.
who you trust to get it, or get it yourself, right?
Yes.
Because it depends on, you don't want other people, certain folks' energies over
Right.
stuff. I was saying the other day, I don't want everybody praying over me, right? I don't trust them, right? So they're going to load up physically as well, right? Of getting and refreshing their supply, their supplies for the work that they were doing.
Right. And the other thing I've thought about, it sort of clarified itself as I listened to this very rich conversation, is this also intersects with literacy, because I remember many of these women who sometime in Sunday school give you $1, a quarter, and say, you can go on, boy, go on. But I realized that many of them were functionally illiterate. Yes, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yes. And this is why so many, and also why so much of it was lost, right? Because this is an oral tradition, and it's also an apprenticeship, right? You're working under one or two other people, and a lot of times it stays within families.
Yes.
A lot of times it stays within, very close circles. And what we're seeing now in the social media or I'm seeing young folks sharing recipes, sharing spells, doing all of these things out in the open. And so, you know, I was talking to my class and we were having this conversation of, is this something, you know, that is, you know, we understand the curiosity behind it, but also you're usually trained in these ways and doled out information bit by bit because it's what you can handle, right? If you're just stumbling into this, you can get yourself wrapped up in some things that, you know, you don't fully understand the reasoning behind. And there has to also be an emotional maturity behind the tradition as well that isn't always being acknowledged when things are just thrown out on the internet or on Instagram or those sorts of things, right? How do you balance that valid curiosity with the sort of responsibility of holding that information? I'm sorry, Dr.
No, I was gonna say, but you also see, you know, when keeping it roots goes wrong, like you see these kids out here doing, you know, working with stuff they only heard about or only saw, you know, in a Disney-fied the Frog Princess thing, and then they're like, I don't understand why this is happening. Like I'm thinking about this one young white woman who was trying to summon some folks to get revenge against her girlfriend, and then the next thing she knows, she's being stalked by the exact same spirit that she was trying to get to invoke revenge. So, got to be careful out here.
People be out here playing in the graveyards and
Yeah,
everything else.
I'm like, no, play no graveyard. No. I mean, like,
you know.
But even though, like, and I'm gonna shut up because this is your thing, Kitty. But I can't help but think about my grandmother told me that my mom Mary, my great grandmother, they lived in Leary, Georgia, and she lived directly across the street from the cemetery, which didn't bother her, right? What bothered her was that they were trying to give her in-house plumbing, and the pipes had to go underneath the cemetery, and she was like, nope. I'm gonna keep on going to the well up the street. I'm gonna keep this house in the back. I was just kind of like, oh yeah, because you just never know. Right. Or even something as random as like, I don't know why I turn my radio down when I go past the cemetery, but my granddaddy taught me that. And he was like, you don't want to get the wrong people's attention. So I ain't trying to get in trouble. I turn it down. As soon as I get past the cemetery, I turn it back up. But I'm just saying, I think that's really, yeah.
I think I can't quite follow that up. So I'm just going to thank you all. I think we will all know to take a little more care out there of what we do and what we wish for and what we wish for others. But thank you so much, Kinitra and Regina.
Thank y'all so much. I felt so loved and supported. I appreciate it.
You are.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you to all of you for joining us too and for sticking around for a few extra minutes. So thanks so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
y'all. Bye.
Take care.